I remember that morning clearly, mostly because it began like any other ordinary Thursday. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the neighborhood in soft, warm gold, and I stepped out onto my porch with a mug of coffee, ready to enjoy a peaceful start to my day. But that peace was shattered the moment I saw it. An envelope taped to my front door in a bright, almost obnoxious neon orange. It practically glowed. I frowned, peeled it off the door, and opened it right there. Inside was a letter with a massive, bold header, "Violation Notice. Immediate action required." Below it, in aggressive red print, was a fine for $200. The stated violation read, "Failure to maintain property, unsightly debris in driveway." What debris? I muttered out loud, staring at my perfectly clean driveway. There was nothing there. No trash, no branches, not even a stray leaf. I walked the length of it twice just to make sure I wasn't missing something. But it was spotless. That was the first moment I felt something was off. Our HOA President, Mrs. Daphne Clark, a woman with the permanent smile of someone who never actually smiled from the heart, had a reputation for being strict. But this didn't even make sense. I decided to walk over to her house. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the letter was meant for another home. When Daphne opened the door, she stood there with her usual overly perfumed presence, wrapped in a bright electric pink robe that nearly hurt my eyes. "Good morning, Mrs. Clark," I said, holding up the violation. "There seems to be an error." "No error," she responded instantly, like she had rehearsed it. "Your driveway violated our community standards this morning." "With what?" I asked. "There was nothing on it when I checked." "Well, it was there earlier," she replied sharply. "I don't need to prove every little thing. The HOA's word should be enough." My eyebrows rose. "There's no photo? No timestamp? Nothing." She folded her arms. "Our job is to maintain community order, not to babysit homeowners." I felt irritation bubbling inside me, but I kept my tone even. "With respect, you can't issue a fine without proof." Her face hardened. "If you have an issue, you can email the board. I don't have time for petty disputes." And with that, she shut the door in my face. As I walked back home, a sick feeling sat in my stomach. Something about her attitude wasn't just rude. It felt calculated. But I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just one weird incident. The next morning proved it wasn't. When I opened my front door at 6 a.m., another bright orange envelope was taped to it. Another fine. Different violation. This time, trash bins left out overnight. Except I had brought them in right after the trash truck left the day before. I checked the timestamp on the notice. It said 3:12 a.m. Who is checking trash bins at 3 in the morning? I asked myself, my frustration deepened. I walked around the side of my house thinking maybe someone had moved the bins without my knowing. But no, they were exactly where they should be. The letter made no sense. I emailed the HOA that morning. No response. I called their office. Straight to voicemail. By the following week, I had received 5 more fines, each one for something more ridiculous than the last. Garden hose left uncoiled, patio lights too bright, unauthorized lawn ornament. I didn't even own lawn ornaments. It felt like I was being targeted, singled out, harassed even. And without photos or proof, I had no way to dispute any of it. My neighbors weren't receiving anything like this. When I asked the couple next door, they looked surprised. "No violations here," they said. "Why? Did something happen?" I laughed bitterly. "Something? Yeah, I'm getting fined like it's a subscription service." At first, I wondered if it was an administrative mistake, but the more it continued, the less it felt accidental. There was a pattern, a rhythm. Every fine appeared between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., always taped to my door, always anonymous except for the HOA letterhead. That was when the idea struck me, a small spark of suspicion turning into a plan. Someone was doing this intentionally. Someone was coming onto my property in the middle of the night, and if that was the case, then I needed to catch them. I bought 2 small hidden cameras, tiny, wireless, and practically invisible once I mounted them above my porch and garage. I positioned them carefully, adjusting the angles so they captured every inch of my front yard and driveway. As I set the cameras, the evening sky faded into deep midnight blue, and my home fell quiet. But inside me, something stirred. Anticipation, tension, curiosity. Whatever was happening, I was finally going to uncover it. When I went to sleep, it was with a strange blend of fear and excitement. I had no idea what was waiting for me on that footage, but deep down, something told me it wasn't going to be simple. And as it turned out, I was right. It wasn't simple at all. It was far worse than I imagined. The next morning, I woke up to yet another orange envelope taped to my door. But this time, I smiled, because last night I had the cameras rolling, and what they captured broke this entire mystery wide open. I didn't even open the new find, not yet. My hands were trembling with anticipation as I carried the envelope inside, tossed it on the table, and pulled up the camera feed on my laptop. It was just after 6 in the morning, but my heart was already pounding like I had sprinted across the neighborhood. The footage loaded. Grainy at first, then sharpening into a clear night vision view of my porch. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. passed, nothing unusual. The neighborhood was still and quiet, bathed in dark, cool bluish shadows. But then, at exactly 2:57 a.m., movement. A figure entered the frame. I leaned in, holding my breath. It was a woman. Tall. Wearing a hoodie, moving quickly but carefully, like she had done this before. She walked right up to my door, took something from her hoodie pocket and taped it up. Then, she turned around and walked back down my driveway. I paused the video and zoomed in on the moment she lifted her head. Her face was partially visible as the porch light caught her features. My stomach dropped. It wasn't Daphne Clark, it was her spouse, Melissa, someone I had barely spoken to except for the occasional awkward wave. She was known for staying out of HOA business, or so everyone thought. Seeing her there, sneaking onto my property at nearly 3 in the morning, taping fines with no cause, it felt surreal, like a nightmare I hadn't woken up from. I pressed play again, but that wasn't the end. At 3:10 a.m., just 13 minutes later, Melissa returned, this time dragging something behind her. I squinted. It looked like a trash bin. My trash bin, but mine had been properly stored. She pulled it into the middle of my driveway and tilted it over. Trash spilled out. Then she snapped a picture with her phone before pushing the bin back where it belonged and hurrying off again. I sat there stunned, jaw clenched, hands shaking with anger. She had staged the violation. Every one of those fines, every absurd accusation, was fabricated, manufactured, created by her. But why? Why would Melissa be doing this? Why would the HOA President's spouse be sneaking around at night like some petty criminal? I played the next recording from the second camera. What I saw made my blood boil even hotter. This angle showed the side of my house where my garden hose was coiled. Around 3:25 a.m., Melissa walked up to it, unrolled it, tossed it across the ground, and took another photo. Then she moved to my patio lights, flicked them on manually, snapped a picture, and turned them off again. There it was. Proof. Clear. Undeniable proof. She wasn't just visiting my property. She was creating the violations. And the worst part? She wasn't acting alone. At the edge of the frame, partially shadowed by a tree, stood Daphne Clark herself, arms crossed, watching everything. A cold chill slid down my spine. This was coordinated, planned, a deliberate attack. I scrolled through the footage again, rewinding and fast-forwarding, noticing more details each time. Their whispered conversation. Daphne checking her phone. Melissa confirming the photos. It wasn't just harassment. It was a setup. I leaned back in my chair, breathing hard. Anger, humiliation, and disbelief swirled inside me. For weeks, I'd been made to feel paranoid, like I was losing my mind, while Daphne and Melissa orchestrated this secret midnight circus to find me for things they were doing. Why? What was their motive? I needed answers, but one thing was certain. I now had leverage. I opened the envelope from that morning, almost laughing when I saw the violation. Unauthorized Halloween decor. I didn't even decorate for Halloween yet. Melissa and Daphne were getting sloppy. but I was done being quiet. I decided to wait until nightfall. I needed calm, and I needed a plan. After the sun dipped below the horizon and the neighborhood settled into darkness, I replayed the footage one more time, absorbing every detail. The evidence was airtight. No room for excuses. No room for denial. I drafted an email to the entire HOA board, attaching both videos. My message was calm, formal, and devastatingly clear. I explained the harassment, the fabricated violations, and the intrusion onto my property. I hovered over the send button but didn't press it yet. Something told me the story wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. I needed to see their reaction. I needed to watch their faces crumble when their little scheme started falling apart. So instead of sending the email, I saved it as a draft. Then I grabbed my phone, locked my doors, and stood at the window, watching Daphne's house glowing faintly in the harsh white porch light. This wasn't just going to be a complaint. This was going to be a takedown, and I wasn't even close to done. The next morning arrived with a gray heaviness that matched the weight I felt in my chest. The neighborhood was unusually quiet, almost like it sensed a storm brewing beneath the calm. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, the footage replayed in my mind. Melissa stumbling around my yard, Daphne watching like some twisted supervisor. The betrayal, the absurdity, the boldness of it all. It kept me wide awake. I knew I needed to move carefully. If I pushed too fast, they might cover their tracks. If I moved too slow, they might escalate. But neither option mattered as much as what happened just after noon. A sharp knock at my door jolted me from my thoughts. When I opened it, there she stood, Daphne Clark, wearing a bright neon lime blouse that clashed violently with her overly stern expression. She had a clipboard tucked under her arm, like she was about to conduct an inspection of my soul. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice dripping with forced cheerfulness. "We need to discuss your repeated violations." I leaned against the doorframe. "Do we?" I asked. "Because I think I've gotten pretty familiar with the routine." Her smile faltered for a split second. Barely noticeable, but enough to reveal a crack in her confidence. "Well," she continued, "it seems you've been ignoring the fines you've received. That's considered non-compliance, which can result in further penalties." I studied her face, wondering how she could stand there and lie without even blinking. "You've been busy early in the mornings," I said quietly. Her posture stiffened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just a comment," I replied, my tone deliberately casual. Her eyes narrowed. "Look, I'm not here to argue. Just pay the fines and bring your home up to code. It's simple." I almost laughed. "Simple," I repeated. "Right." She tried to step forward as if to peer inside my house, but I blocked the doorway. A flicker of irritation crossed her face. "You know," she said, her voice turning cold, "things are much easier for homeowners who cooperate." "And things get interesting when homeowners don't," I replied. For a moment, we just stared at each other, neither of us willing to blink first. Then she huffed, turned around sharply, and walked off my porch, her heels clacking with a kind of manufactured authority. As she headed back home, I noticed Melissa standing at their window, half hidden behind a curtain. Her arms were crossed, her expression hard, and her entire posture radiated tension. The moment our eyes met, she yanked the curtain shut. Something was unraveling on their end, and I had barely done anything yet. The rest of the day passed in slow, thoughtful silence. I reviewed the footage again, taking notes, making sure I didn't miss anything. Every detail had to be airtight when this went down. I wasn't just fighting a petty power trip, I was dismantling a system they had abused for who knows how long. That evening, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. I needed air. I needed to see the community they claimed to be protecting. Kids were riding bikes in circles, families were tending gardens, elderly neighbors were sitting on porches sipping tea. It was peaceful, simple, and normal. The kind of place where people should feel safe. But I didn't feel safe. Not with people like Daphne and Melissa weaponizing authority. A few neighbors waved at me as I passed. Some approached to chat. Eventually, the conversation shifted to the HOA, as it always seemed to. "You hear about the Johnsons?" one neighbor asked. Got fined for having a blue curtain in their kitchen window. A kitchen window! Someone else groaned. We got fined for having our welcome mat slightly crooked. I swear they fine us just to remind us who's in charge. Their complaints formed a chorus of frustration. A pattern. A long list of grievances pointing to the same villain, Daphne. I realized then that this wasn't just my fight. This was a community-wide problem that nobody had dared to challenge. People were too afraid, too tired, too overwhelmed by Daphne's relentless harassment. But now I had something they didn't. Proof. Hard, visual, undeniable proof. And that was when I saw him, Tom, the HOA treasurer, stepping out of his garage. He was quiet, kind, and always seemed uncomfortable with confrontation. I walked over to greet him, and he smiled awkwardly. "How's everything?" he asked. "I'd say interesting," I replied. "Listen, can I ask you something?" "Off the record?" His shoulders stiffened. "Depends. What do you know about the fines I've been getting?" "All the ones with no proof?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Honestly, Daphne handles most of the enforcement stuff. The rest of us, we don't really see the details unless there's an appeal." "Have there been a lot of appeals?" I asked. He glanced around before lowering his voice. "More than you'd think. And almost all were denied." I could see it. He was uncomfortable, conflicted, maybe even afraid. "Tom," I said softly, "if there was something going on, something unfair, and someone had evidence, what would happen?" His eyes widened slightly. "If there was evidence," he said, "the board would have no choice. Daphne would lose her position. There could be legal consequences." "And Melissa?" I asked. He hesitated. "Anyone involved would be held accountable." I nodded, thanked him, and walked home with a new sense of certainty. The board wasn't entirely corrupt. Some were just overshadowed by Daphne's iron grip. When I reached my porch, I paused to look at the spot where those neon orange envelopes always hung. Not tonight, not ever again. The plan was forming clearly in my mind now, and it was strong, solid, airtight. Tomorrow morning, I would send the email, not just to the HOA board, but to every homeowner in the neighborhood. But I underestimated something. Daphne and Melissa were desperate, and desperate people do unpredictable things. Just didn't know how unpredictable it was about to get. I woke up early the next morning, the sun breaking through the clouds in streaks of fiery gold and sharp orange, painting the sky like it was ready to witness something monumental. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the email draft I had prepared. All the footage was attached. My written explanation was clear and factual. It was the perfect bomb to drop. But as my finger hovered over the send button, something unexpected happened. Another knock at the door. I sighed. Here we go again. When I opened the door, a group of people stood on my porch. Neighbors I recognized, including Tom the treasurer, a few board members, and even Mrs. Green from across the street, who always smelled like cinnamon and lavender. "Good morning," Tom said awkwardly. "We need to talk." I raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "There's been a complaint," one of the board members said. "Daphne reported that you've been acting hostile toward her, and the board wants to address it at an emergency meeting today." I stared at them, stunned for a second. "Hostile? Toward her?" Mrs. Green folded her arms. "Honestly, it feels like she's stirring something up again. But the rules say if the president calls an emergency meeting, we have to attend." "Of course." Daphne sensed something. Maybe she saw me talking to Tom. Maybe she felt the shift in wind. Either way, she was trying to strike first. "What time?" I asked. 30 minutes, Tom said. I nodded slowly. "I'll be there." They left, and I closed the door behind me, leaning against it. 30 minutes. Daphne was trying to force the board to condemn me before I could reveal the truth, but she didn't know something important. I wasn't coming empty-handed. When I arrived at the HOA clubhouse, the room was already buzzing. The walls were painted a dull beige, but today they seemed to glow under the tense atmosphere. Nearly 20 homeowners had shown up, curious about the emergency meeting. Daphne stood at the front of the room, wearing a bright sunflower yellow blazer that looked painfully cheerful given the situation. Melissa sat beside her, arms crossed, looking like she'd swallowed a lemon. When Daphne saw me walk in, a small, victorious smile curled across her lips. "Ah, there he is," she announced loudly. "Our disruptive homeowner. Let's get started." I sat in the front row, keeping my expression calm. Daphne tapped her clipboard. "We are here to discuss repeated hostile behavior from Mr. Rivers." She gestured toward me dramatically, as if unveiling a criminal. "He has confronted me aggressively on multiple occasions, refused to comply with rules, and—" I raised my hand. "Is there evidence?" She blinked. "Excuse me?" "Evidence," I repeated. "You're accusing me of hostility. Do you have proof?" The room shifted. People whispered among themselves. Daphne chuckled nervously. "I don't need to prove every—" "Actually," Tom interrupted from the back, "you do. Any claim presented to the board requires supporting documentation." Daphne shot him a glare sharp enough to cut glass. She opened her mouth to continue, but I spoke before she could. "Maybe this will help," I said calmly, standing up. I walked to the front of the room, plugged my laptop into the projector, and pulled up the footage. The room went silent. Pitch silent. I pressed play. There, on a massive screen, in a room full of neighbors, the entire community watched as Melissa slunk around my property in the middle of the night. They saw her dragging my trash bin, dumping it out, staging the scene. They saw her unrolling my garden hose. They saw her taking pictures. Then came the moment Daphne appeared in the frame. A collective gasp filled the room. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Someone else muttered, "Unbelievable." Daphne went pale. Melissa sank back in her chair, eyes wide and unblinking. I let the video run until the end, then stopped it and faced the room. "For weeks," I said evenly, my voice steady and clear, "I've been fined for violations that never happened, and every one of those violations was created by the HOA President and her spouse." No one spoke. "Not yet." Then the explosion came. "How could you?" Someone shouted at Daphne. "This is illegal," another yelled. "You targeted him. You lied to all of us." Tom stood up, anger shaking in his voice. "Daphne, this is a serious breach of power. You violated multiple bylaws." He looked at the rest of the board. "Effective immediately. I motion to remove Daphne as HOA President." "I second it," another board member said instantly. Third, fourth, fifth. The votes fell like dominoes, rapid and unstoppable. Daphne sputtered, tried to defend herself, but her voice was swallowed by outrage. Melissa grabbed her arm. "Daph, let's go." But the room was no longer theirs. Security, actual community security, not the pretend authority Daphne flexed, escorted them both out as the room erupted into cheers, relief, and heated conversation. When the chaos settled, Tom approached me, his expression softening. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You didn't just stand up for yourself, you helped everyone." I nodded. It wasn't just about me, but even as the room calmed and neighbors thanked me one by one, I felt a strange sensation, like the story wasn't finished, like there was one more turn left, one more truth waiting to surface. And I was right, because later that night I found something on my porch that changed everything again. A small envelope. Not neon orange this time. White. Plain. Unmarked. Inside it was a single handwritten note. And what it said made my heart stop. The white envelope felt strangely heavy in my hand, even though I knew it held nothing more than a small piece of paper. After everything that had happened at the HOA meeting, I expected silence, maybe gossip from neighbors, maybe a little awkwardness. But not this. Not a quiet letter on my porch, placed so carefully that it couldn't have been accidental. I stepped inside, shut the door gently, and turned on the hallway light. The glow washed over the note, making the faint handwriting more visible. My pulse quickened as I unfolded it. There were only 5 words written in dark ink. "You don't know the truth." That was it. No signature, no clues. No explanation. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to make sense of it. Who sent it? Why now? What truth was left to reveal? We had just exposed Daphne and Melissa in front of the entire community. Their scheme had collapsed. Their authority burned down to ashes in public. What truth could possibly be bigger than that? I read the note again, my mind racing. The handwriting wasn't familiar. It wasn't neat enough to be Daphne's, and it wasn't slanted enough to be Melissa's. It looked rushed, almost desperate. My first instinct was to dismiss it as a prank, maybe a neighbor trying to be dramatic. But something about the timing felt too precise, too intentional. It was left on the same day of the takedown. It wasn't coincidence. My gut told me this was real. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house, every rustle outside, every soft hum of the AC made me sit up, alert. I kept thinking about Melissa's face when the footage aired. The shock, yes, but also something else. Something like fear. Not fear of being caught, fear of something bigger. I replayed the events of the meeting in my mind, every expression, every reaction. There was something off, something I missed. Sometime after midnight, I finally grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. The air was cold, the sky washed in deep midnight blue, with only a few stars poking through. I walked slowly down the sidewalk, letting my feet guide me. The quiet was unsettling. When I reached the Clark house, I paused. The porch light was off. The blinds were closed. Their car was gone. They weren't home. A hollow feeling settled in my stomach. Where did they go? And why did the note show up after they left? The next morning, I went to speak with Tom. He invited me inside his home with a tired smile, and we sat at his kitchen table, the sunlight spilling over us in warm, soft amber. "I need to ask you something," I said, sliding the note toward him. He picked it up, squinting. "Where did this come from?" "My porch. Last night," he frowned. "Do you know who wrote it?" "No." "Do you know what it means?" "No," I repeated. He leaned back, eyes drifting to the window. "I don't want to get involved in more drama," he said quietly. "But there's something you should know." My pulse picked up. "Daphne wasn't always like this," he said. "When she first became HOA President, she was strict, sure, but reasonable. Things changed last year." "How?" I asked. He hesitated. "There was an audit. A complaint about funds. Nothing conclusive, but enough to make the board suspicious. And right after that, Daphne started tightening control. She pushed new fines, new regulations, new rules. She became obsessed with compliance." "That doesn't explain the nighttime break-ins," I said. "No," he replied. "But it explains desperation." I leaned forward. "Desperate for what?" Tom took a long breath. "For income." "What?" He met my eyes, his expression solemn. "Every fine paid by a homeowner goes into the HOA fund. And there were discrepancies. Money moving in ways we couldn't trace." My jaw tightened. "Are you saying she was stealing from the HOA?" He didn't answer, but his silence was enough. Pieces started snapping into place. The sudden increase in fines. The baseless violations. The refusal to provide proof. The rejection of appeals. Daphne's frantic need to maintain control, but if she was misusing HOA funds, then that meant the staged fines weren't just harassment. They were income. Income she depended on, and now she'd been caught. I felt cold inside, a creeping chill that settled in my bones. I thanked Tom and left with my mind spinning. If Daphne was involved in financial misconduct, she wasn't acting alone. Melissa helped stage the violations. But who handled the money? Who processed the payments? Who kept the records hidden? The HOA accountant, a man named Harold, someone I barely knew beyond seeing him shuffle papers at meetings. My hands were shaking by the time I reached my house. I needed answers. Real answers. The kind that didn't come from speculation or whispers behind closed doors. I searched through my emails until I found Harold's address and sent him a simple message. "Can we talk privately?" "It's important," he replied 5 minutes later. "Meet me behind the clubhouse at 7 p.m. Come alone." Those were not the words of an innocent man. That evening, the sky turned sharp orange and purple, the kind of sunset that looked beautiful but felt heavy, like a warning. I walked toward the clubhouse slowly, scanning the area. Harold was already there, standing in the shadow of the building, wringing his hands nervously. When he saw me approach, he swallowed hard. "You shouldn't have shown that footage," he whispered. I stared at him. "Why not?" "Because they're not done," he said, voice trembling. "And you're standing in the middle of something much bigger than you realize." I felt the note in my pocket like a burning ember. What truth am I missing? I asked. He looked around as if expecting someone to jump out of the bushes. Then he leaned in closer. "Daphne wasn't the one who started the fines." I froze. "What do you mean?" Harold wiped the sweat from his brow. "She didn't plan it. She didn't come up with the idea. She didn't even know half of what Melissa was doing." "Then who?" He cut me off, voice shaking. "Someone else pushed it. Someone else gave the orders. Someone else needed the money." "Who?" I whispered. Harold looked terrified. He glanced behind me, and the moment his eyes widened, I understood. Someone was standing there, watching us, and my story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. I turned slowly, every muscle in my body tense, every instinct on high alert. The light from the clubhouse spilled across the concrete, casting long shadows. And there, just at the edge of the glow, stood a figure I didn't expect to see. Mrs. Green, the same sweet, elderly neighbor who always smelled like cinnamon and lavender. The same woman who brought cookies to block parties and waved at kids from her porch. She stood motionless, her face unreadable, her posture incredibly still. Her presence chilled me in a way I couldn't immediately explain. "Mrs. Green?" I asked cautiously. "Are you all right?" She took a few slow steps toward us, her shoes clicking softly on the pavement. "You should go home, Harold," she said gently. Harold stiffened. I didn't tell him anything," he sputtered. "I swear," she gave him a small smile. "You did the right thing." He nodded shakily and hurried away, almost stumbling in his rush to leave. Now it was just the two of us, me and the woman I least suspected of anything. She stopped a few feet away, her face illuminated now by the clubhouse lights, and there was something in her eyes I had never seen before. Calculating intelligence. Cold awareness. Resolve. "You shouldn't have gotten involved," she said softly. A chill crawled down my spine. "Involved in what?" "In the finances," she replied as calmly as if we were discussing garden plants. "Those fines were not about punishments. They were about collection." I stared at her. "You knew about the stolen funds?" "I managed them," she said simply. My stomach lurched. She continued. "Daphne was a useful shield. Too eager to control. Too proud to question. Melissa too loyal to disobey. They did what I suggested, thinking they were preserving order. But the truth," she tilted her head slightly, "the truth is much simpler. I needed the money." Her confession was surreal, like hearing a bedtime storyteller admit she was also a bank robber. "Why?" I asked, voice low. She breathed out slowly, almost peacefully. "Because people like us have needs. I've lived here for 37 years. Watched this community rise, fall, argue, rebuild. The HOA fund was underutilized, and I knew how to make it productive." "You stole from your neighbors," I said, disbelief mixing with anger. "I redistributed resources," she corrected softly. "Much more efficient, much more effective, and no one noticed, until you." My pulse hammered in my ears. "So the staged fines, that was you?" She shook her head. "I never stepped foot on your property. Melissa did that because she wanted to please Daphne. Daphne approved it because she trusted my advice. But the idea of increasing fines, increasing compliance pressure, that was mine. She took another step closer. You weren't supposed to fight back. Most people don't. They pay. They complain. Then they move on. Her eyes narrowed. But not you. Because it was wrong, I said. And that, she replied, makes you dangerous. I swallowed hard. Are you threatening me? No, she said calmly. I'm giving you a choice. Reached into her coat pocket, my muscles tensed, instinctively. But what she pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was an envelope, white, identical to the one left on my porch. She extended it toward me. Inside, she said, is everything you need to end this quietly. A signed confession from Daphne, written last night. A statement from Melissa. Bank logs, transaction records. If you take this and walk away, the board will remove them permanently, the money will be returned, and I will never interfere with you again. My mind raced. And if I refuse? Her voice remained calm, steady. Then the community will implode from the scandal. Home values will plummet. Neighbors will turn on each other. Lawsuits will drain every dollar the HOA has. And you will be held responsible for lighting the match. I stared at her, horrified. You're blaming me for your corruption? She shrugged slightly. Narratives are flexible. The offer hung in the air like poison. She wanted me to bury the truth to protect her empire of manipulation. She wanted silence, compliance, fear. But I had spent weeks living under fear. I wasn't going back. No, I said slowly. I'm not taking your envelope. For the first time, her expression cracked. Just a flicker. A tremor of annoyance. You don't understand what you're risking. No, I said. You don't understand the kind of person you targeted. I'm not silent. I'm not intimidated. And I'm not alone. I stepped back. My neighbors deserve the truth. Her jaw tightened. Then you leave me no choice. I turned and walked away before she could say another word. My hands were shaking, but my conviction wasn't. I went home, pulled up the email draft I had originally prepared, and then added one more attachment, the recording from tonight's conversation. Mrs. Green didn't know that the moment she approached us, I'd hit record on my phone. Her confession, her threats, her manipulation, all captured. This wasn't just going to the HOA board, it was going to the homeowners, the county and law enforcement. I pressed send. The message whooshed out a final, irrevocable act. Minutes later, my phone exploded with notifications, emails, messages, replies. The community woke up all at once. Shock, outrage, disbelief, but also gratitude. The truth wasn't buried. It was exposed. Days later, the investigation began. Daphne and Melissa faced their charges. And Mrs. Green, the mastermind, was taken away in handcuffs, her serene mask finally shattered. The neighborhood slowly healed after that. It took time, meetings, new leadership, transparency. But hope returned. And me? I stood on my porch one morning, the sunrise glowing in bright gold and fiery orange, and breathed in the peace I had fought so hard to reclaim. No more fines, no more midnight intrusions, just quiet, just home. The way it should have always been.